what does it mean to own something, right? And the word ownership is really a red herring. It's sort of like the word consciousness, right? What does it mean to be conscious? Or AI, what does AI mean and stuff, right? And I've always found that it's really useful if you can discover some pragmatic definition. Usually someone else has come up with that pragmatic definition. And also acknowledging that there's always going to be many, many definitions for any of these things. There's 20 different definitions for AI, there's 20 definitions for consciousness, et cetera. And there's 20 definitions for NFTs. That's okay, right? So what is or ownership, actually, I should say too. So what is a pragmatic definition for ownership? And over the one that I've discovered is a pragmatic definition for ownership is a bundle of rights. To own something is to have a particular bundle of rights.
This is season 2 of Voices of the Data Economy, a podcast supported by Ocean Protocol Foundation. We bring to you the voices shaping the data economy and challenging it at the same time. Listen to founders, tech policy experts, and pioneers in impact investing, all sharing their relationship with data. Hello everyone, today we have none other than our very own Trent with us. Trent is the founder of Ocean Protocol, and this is actually the second appearance of an Ocean founder on this podcast. Last year, around similar time, we had Bruce Bond, and that's the time we really spoke about what is Web3, the concept of a new data economy, and all the things around that. So, my suggestion is that it might be a good idea to go through that episode before you come to this one. But don't worry, if not, we will quickly try to touch upon most of the things that we spoke about then and see that what's happened between then and now. So, thank you for coming here today, Trent, and is so excited to talk to you.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So Trent, before we really start talking about Ocean and all the great things that you're doing there, probably I would love to know how Ocean happened to you, and how does it really fit into your personal mission when it comes to data ownership, and all the things you believe in your life.
Sure. We probably have to start at the very beginning. I was raised in rural Canada on a farm, and it was, in the area I lived in, the province in Canada, it was very much co-ops everywhere. There was a local co-op for grocery store. There was a local co-op bank. And there was one of the biggest co-ops in the world for farmers, something called Saskatchewan Wheat Pool, where there was tens of thousands of farmers that collectively, sold their grain to that co-op, and then that co-op would market their grain and distribute it, and so on. So I kind of grew up in a very co-op-oriented atmosphere, which is, there's a capitalist side, which is, the farmers having their own businesses and so on, but then also working together with other farmers to achieve, broader community aims as part of the capitalist side. So that's kind of what I grew up in, and also, shoveling pig manure, driving grain trucks, and hacking computers, actually. So that's sort of the environment I grew up in. And, studied in university, electrical engineering, computer science. And then for about 15, 20 years, I sort of found this passion for work on artificial intelligence. So with that, I did a couple startups and a PhD on that. Really, and because I was trained as an electrical engineer, then the most straightforward application was to use AI tools to help solve problems in circuit design. So I really zoomed in and got really good at helping analog designers, memory designers, all this design their circuits for using AI tools under the hood. So this whole world of computer-aided design. And and this was basically from the late 90s until the mid 2010s or so. So that was kind of a long time doing that as an entrepreneur, as an academic, all sort of rolled at once, and a PhD, of course, I mentioned there too. And then I'm a big nerd, so I like to follow cool technologies and so on. Infatuations with VR or brain-computer interfaces or whatever, and along in 2010, I became fascinated with Bitcoin, and downloaded a node and played with it. Friends of mine and I would hang out and talk about it all the time. And bought some Bitcoin in 2011, lost those keys long ago. And then in 2013, I started spending a lot more. Basically, moved to Berlin and started hanging out with people in Berlin. And I discovered this group of people that was talking not just about Bitcoin but about blockchain, and that really caught my interest. I hadn't really thought much about the other applications, beyond Bitcoin, and so went back to the Bitcoin white paper. Learned about, looked at the detail, realized, oh wow, this thing is super general. It's a general purpose technology. It's not just to solve one problem, but it could solve a whole swath of different problems and really, transform the world in really positive ways if wielded well as a tool. So from that, that was early 2013. Um, Along the way, I also talk a lot with my wife, who's very patient with me as I get excited about technology. She is a professional museologist, so she's worked at the Louvre, she's ran galleries, that sort of thing. And in 2013, in early 2013, after I was learning about blockchain, we had just visited a gallery and we were sitting down and she started talking about the problem of owning digital art. And I had then also talking, been going on and on about Bitcoin. And then the neurons fired together and we basically asked, what if you could own Bitcoin? Sorry, what if you could own digital art the way you own Bitcoin? And that turned out to be a really great problem to solve. So we started pursuing it, right? We started basically, writing about it, pulling in Bruce, who you had in earlier on this podcast, as someone to help pursue the project with. And then also pulled in some people to help build some prototypes and stuff, work with artists. And that's what led to Ascribe. So by mid 2014, we were full time at it. Late 2014, chasing Ascribe, which is basically this platform to solve problems for digital artists and for collectors, right? So from the artist side, it's like, okay, how do you get paid? How do you make better money? From the collector side, it's how can there be value ascribed to these digital art works? And then for the galleries, operating as middleman, basically, how do they connect the buyers and the sellers better with, better tracks of provenance of who owns what, all that. So this is really what Ascribe set out to solve. And, we built something we were quite proud of. We pursued that for a few years. And, we got investment, all that. And, that basically pivoted into BigchainDB, which was basically to address issues of scale of data of blockchains. And that pivoted into Ocean. So by mid 2017, we had really started working in earnest in Ocean, even in early 2017 with sort of a fork of BigChain actually. And since that time, since late 2017, the focus has been full Ocean, and everything kind of all the work that I had done before and that Bruce had done and so on, all roads led to Ocean in a sense. So the AI work that I had done, I had a lot of friends in the AI world and they had a big problem of how do we get our hands on data. They want to build, a friend of mine, for example, he was trying to build models to predict cancer and off of genetic data, but he could only get his hands on samples of about 100 people at once. So you've got this genetic data with tens of thousands of input variables and only about 100 samples. So you can't even build a good linear model. So, and imagine though, if you could build a model off of not just 100 people, but 10,000 or a million or even a billion without, causing privacy issues, right? That would be like pretty amazing. And we started to recognize that blockchain could solve that. So, and that was basically the impetus of Ocean. So from my perspective, I saw that, how do you get data into the hands of AI people, like more data into the hands of AI people where they really know how to create value from it? And then there was other aspects too. It's like, okay, how do you think about data? Well, data is a form of intellectual property, just like digital art is. So then it's like, great, all the stuff that we learned about helping people to manage their intellectual property with Ascribe, we can do the same tools and tactics with Ocean. And then finally, the big data side too with BigchainDB, and we pulled that in. And then Bruce also had a bunch of the financial background, et cetera. And all of this just tied together, and that's what led to Ocean. And of course, there was bigger structural issues that we saw with the world beyond that. Things like, where it turns out that most of the money in AI was flowing into the hands of just a small number of companies, ones that had not only lots of data, but lots of AI expertise, and that was a rare combination. And that rare combination basically was, Google, Facebook, a few others, right? And so they were reaping the rewards, and basically, um, doing this arbitrage, taking advantage of people who didn't really see that their data had value, but Facebook and Google, et cetera, have known how to extract value out of that and make billions in the process, right? So we saw, okay, can we rewire the rules of ownership around data, around people's data, et cetera, in a way that it can benefit? And it's not just for people, right? It can be for small companies, large companies, nations, et cetera. They all really care about their data sovereignty, about managing and controlling their own data. So what if you can make rewire the rules for that, make it easy to implement for people building applications, and ultimately leading to applications that are easy to use for people. So that's the story of Ocean.
Wow, wow, wow. Okay, so I mean, we can really zoom into a lot of things you mentioned, and also go back to what you did with NFTs, but that on a later part. So if you're like me and you've been following Ocean, you would have heard things like data marketplace, Ocean marketplace, and a lot. And I've heard that, and I've been following up with that. But I probably would love if you can give a little bit of background on some terms and explain it to our listeners, like something like, what is actually a data token, and what does a data marketplace look like? And now, when you explain that, where does actually Ocean come into the picture?
Sure. So, at a high level, right, kind of the aim is for people and organizations to reclaim their data sovereignty, where they can, own and control and manage their own data while preserving privacy, right? And then, if you think about it, data is valuable. So around, rewiring the world for management of data and data sovereignty, given that data is valuable, it really, a lot of it is about creating this open data economy where, it's a level playing field for all, while preserving privacy, right? So you want to have this data economy, but then if you've got an economy, well, what is sort of, critical elements of an economy? Well, you need there to be, buying and selling of data, right? And okay, if you're going to have buying and selling of data, you could have one person selling to another, and if you have a bunch of those back and forth, sort of over the counter, whatever you call it, that's a start. But if you can have platforms that connect a bunch of possible buyers with a bunch of possible sellers, that those platforms are marketplaces, right? Like that's the role of marketplace. And so you could imagine, okay, let's have one big giant perfect beautiful marketplace to connect all the potential buyers and all the potential sellers. But that, of course, on its own would be centralized, right? And it's not really one size fits all anyway. You're going to have some marketplaces that are tuned to buying data from farmers and selling data to farmers or otherwise, and other ones around the data that you might have otherwise shared to Facebook, for example, or data about your location, or data that a company might have on sales of their cars or whatever it is. And so there's all these different sort of shapes and sizes of types of data, different verticals of this. So we saw, okay, instead of one data marketplace, what if there were 1,000 different data marketplaces, right? And what does it take to get to 1,000 different data marketplaces for 1,000 data marketplaces to bloom? And these could be web apps, these could be mobile apps, they could even be marketplaces that don't even look like marketplaces, right? So that's basically what we were aiming for, is as sort of a first, like in a sense, you've got a data economy happening if you've got lots of exchange of data, privacy preserving, et cetera, where there's a lot of value being transferred, as well as open data sharing. But for pure open data sharing, where there isn't any permissions or anything, we already have the web, right? Like that was the idea of the web when it was invented in 1989 by Tim Berners-Lee out of CERN in Switzerland. All he wanted to do is share data with his physicist friends, right? And that's what he did, right? And so, the World Wide Web is a data sharing protocol itself, but it doesn't have anything to say about the buying and selling of these items. And it also doesn't have sort of, that's for the, exchange of value where things are priced. And even for the free stuff, right? What if you have a group of 10 of you or 1,000 of you in a company, and you want to share data amongst each other? It's sort of like fine-grained permissions, right? So those are a couple things that the World Wide Web protocol doesn't do out of the box. But what if you could sort of layer on top of that, right? So going back, I'm going to answer your questions now, but the overall, I wanted to sort of flesh out this idea of what a data economy looks like. So on one part, it's 1,000 data marketplaces of different shapes and sizes, and another part, it's data sharing that is, free, but with more fine-grained permissions to be able to share amongst a group, et cetera. So extending above and beyond what the World Wide Web does. So then drilling in, how might you do this, right? And if you and this is where basically we said, okay, we know that blockchain itself provides a lot of potential tools here. We had already spent many years in blockchain, so we understood a lot of the benefits of blockchain quite intimately, right? And there's a few core benefits compared to, say, the very mundane description of a blockchain is it's just a database, but it's a very special database, right? It's very special in that it adds 4 new characteristics that kind of give it, really cool possibilities. Any one of those 4 characteristics is interesting. It's decentralized, so instead of being controlled by a single entity like Facebook or something, that control is spread among 10 or 1,000 or 10,000 people, right? And that, if you're spread among 10,000 people, then you're essentially a public utility network, right? So that's one. The second is immutability. So you can have these provenance trails of the transactions happening. So just like in digital art, right? You can see, okay, this digital art was first, minted by this person, this NFT, and then it got sold to this person, then this person, then this person. So you have the provenance trail. And all of that is on the blockchain, it's immutable. Once it's there, it's like etched into stone for good. The third thing is the fact that you can own assets, right? So what does it mean if I own, 1 Bitcoin? It means that I've got a private key. It's sort of like a password, but I've got the private key to a particular address that holds 1 Bitcoin. And it means, I can use that private key to basically say, send, 0.3 Bitcoin to this person here, send 0.2 Bitcoin to that person, up to spending all of that 1 Bitcoin that I have there, right? So that's the third thing. Basically, ownership is the possession of that private key, right? So not your keys, not your Bitcoin, your keys, your Bitcoin. And this translates to beyond Bitcoin to things like NFTs or data, right? So your keys, your NFTs, your keys, your data, right? So, and then there's one fourth benefit of blockchain, which is incentives. So, Bitcoin's kind of cool and kind of amazing in that with just, a piece of software that initially one team or one person wrote, this, somehow grew into this, global phenomenon with, tens of thousands of people running nodes, this asset that is worth more than $1 trillion and spawning a whole new industry. And that was just with, one chunk of code that did evolve over time. And the core of this is that is incentives. So this piece of software said, I'm going to pay you just a little bit of Bitcoin if you help to secure the network, right? So every 10 minutes, you have if you're helping to secure the network, you have a chance of winning some Bitcoin, right? So those 4 things are the big benefits of blockchain compared to previous, boring, databases, if you will, right? So decentralized, immutable, assets, and incentives, right? And then, then looping back once again to the markets, we asked, okay, how do we, rewire the world for new rules around data? How do we create, how do we let 1,000 data marketplaces bloom? And then, with the understanding that we can use this new tool, blockchain, to do so. And with that new tool, given these capabilities, like mentioned, decentralized, immutable assets and incentives. So we said, okay, for sure. So with that, the initial design of Ocean, V1, V2, we had some designs around, you own the data if you have private keys. But then we started asking, okay, how do we make this, be even more interoperable with other blockchain tools out there, et cetera? Because, even when we started building Ocean V3, this is about 1.5 years ago, it was already, a huge industry, hundreds of billions. I forget if it had hit $1 trillion yet. And there was all these tools, there's these crypto wallets to hold your, ETH tokens and Bitcoin tokens and tokens from everything else, including Ocean. MetaMask, Trezor, hardware wallets, industrial grade ones, that are, all this stuff. So there's all these amazing tools just like for managing those crypto assets, holding them for custody as well as transferring them and so on. And then there's also a bunch of tools around DAOs and, groups of people managing assets and exchanges, right? Buying and selling these assets, whether centralized or decentralized and so on. So we asked, okay, how can we leverage some of these concepts to make Ocean more interoperable? And we realized something very straightforward is in the world of data, if I publish a data set, then, and maybe there might be 10 or 1,000 people that want to license that data set, that want to use it, right? So that's a fungible concept. If you've got a license and I've got a license, I could swap my license with you. You could send yours to me, and we're just as happy because it means the same thing, right? We can each, use that data set.
Yeah.
It's like if you and I each own, the same Michael Jackson Thriller CD, right? We could swap them, not a big deal. So same thing here. They're fungible. They're swappable, and with that, then we said, okay, well, there's an existing standard out there called ERC20, and it's a standard for fungible tokens. And Ocean token itself is fungible, and there's all the tokens out there, Bitcoin token, Ethereum, all of those, they're all fungible. And beyond a few of the ones that have their own base chain, like Bitcoin and Ethereum, the vast majority of tokens follow the standard. So we said, well, what if each data set had its own ERC20 token that followed the standard? So let's say I published a data set for, say, my DNA. What if that DNA got its own data token, its own ERC20 token standard?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and not so it's following the standard. So I might say, okay, I'm going to publish Trent's data set, maybe some CSV, and I'm going to mint 1,000 tokens of this. So now, I could send 1.0 tokens to you, and now you have the right to consume that and use it. I could send another 1.0 tokens to, Alice, and Alice can then consume it, et cetera, right? And so basically, that is the idea of a data token. An Ocean data token is a fungible token following the ERC20 token standard, and it with great benefits in terms of interoperability and simplicity. Interoperability, because out of the box, all those wallets that people have already are already using to hold their Bitcoin, their ETH, their Ocean, etc., can now hold data tokens, right? So not only hold them but manage them, right? So if I have 20 of these Trent DNA tokens in my MetaMask sitting on my phone, I can use my phone to share access to that to others. I could send 1.0 tokens to you from my phone using MetaMask. So MetaMask becomes a data sharing platform, right? And any crypto wallet does. And how about one that is bank grade security for data sharing? Trezor or Ledger, right? Hardware wallets. And these hardware wallets are known to have bank grade security, right? So, and this is compare that to the status quo of every month or three you hear about another hack of Equifax or Bitcoin or otherwise, right? I saw one in the last week. I think there was one, the CIA got hacked, and there was like thousands of people's. Yeah, I know. Hey? So there was thousands of people's addresses from the CIA, right? And that's going to be sensitive data.
Yeah.
So that's kind of been the status quo, and it's like, okay, here we go again, and this is a big problem, right? So, and a cool thing about blockchain, like you might say, okay, bank grade security. And maybe I'll just elaborate like how that could possibly be. Like, how can it be bank grade security even though it's on you? And the answer is, it flips around the security model. So the traditional security model is M&M, where you have the lots and lots of super valuable data sitting inside. That's all the yummy chocolate, and then you've got this hard shell around, right? But if anyone is able to come along and pierce any tiny bit of that hard shell, then they can go in and eat all the yummy chocolate, right? And that's the traditional security model. So when Equifax got hacked, some hacker found their way in and basically got access to those 700 million people's worth of records. I think it was 700 million, 300 million or 700 million people, I forget. And same thing with CIA or otherwise, right? So that's the traditional model. What blockchain does, it says, you know what is the most valuable thing? It's this much smaller set of data, which is a list of transactions of what has been sent where. And that is basically, the data on the blockchain. And imagine if imagine if you have 10,000 copies of that data among 10,000 people, and those people are incentivized to keep those copies together. So that's basically the list of transactions, and that's the 10,000 miners running Bitcoin, et cetera, right? Or Ethereum, et cetera. And so basically now, if I'm so that's how the security model gets inverted. So you've got this rock hard center, this sort of like a nut, and then around that, it's semi-malleable, but it doesn't compromise the core chain, right? So maybe an exchange gets hacked now and then, but that doesn't affect the integrity of the rest of the system, right? And so it really flips it around. So now imagine you can take and insert into this rock hard nugget of the system in the very center ways to manage data by using the existing infrastructure. And that's exactly what Ocean is doing. So we're using the existing infrastructure of the chains, as well as one level up, all this infrastructure that has really gotten a lot hardened for ERC20 tokens, for these fungible tokens, and for the wallets, right? So now we basically are inheriting all of this, really great infrastructure from the world of blockchain, bank grade security, et cetera. But now we are porting it over to the world of data management for custody of data and for management of data, right? So that's basically the essence of data tokens. It's really this idea of, leveraging all the existing infrastructure for more. And then, markets basically, it kind of extends on this. So in the world of blockchain, there's also centralized exchanges and decentralized exchanges, right? Like,
Yes,
you've got Coinbase, you've got Binance, et cetera, for centralized.
true.
Decentralized, you've got Balancer, Uniswap, et cetera. But you know what they're exchanging? They're exchanging fungible tokens, right? ERC20, et cetera. So you can actually, if you want, the decentralized ones are permissionless. Like, you can go in and create your own swap between, say, Ocean and ETH if you want. But then, given that data tokens are already ERC20 fungible, you can go into Uniswap and create your own pool that swaps ETH to data tokens, or create a balancer pool that swaps Ocean to data tokens, or like for a particular data token, right? And that's exactly what we do. So Ocean Market is a data marketplace where you go there and people can publish their data assets to create these fungible token contracts. And then others can go on there and they can buy and sell data sets. And under the hood, it's using exchange technology. Specifically, it's using decentralized exchange technology from Balancer. So once again, we're able to leverage off-the-shelf technology that has been developed for crypto, and we are basically leveraging it to solve long-standing problems in the world of data, right? So basically, for data custody and data management, that's wallets. And then for buying and selling of data, you can have a fixed price, and we just have simple contracts for that. Or you can even have automatic pricing of data, automatic discovery of data, and that's really what these decentralized exchanges are for. And that was always a big question too. How do you price data? Well, how do you price Ocean? You have these decentralized exchanges. So same thing with data tokens. How do you price data tokens? You have these decentralized exchanges that do it automatically, right? So that's I guess a summary. It was a longer answer, but I hope I downloaded a mental model for your audience.
Yeah, no, it was amazing actually. And also, it sort of answers the question to a lot of things we have been discussing in the past episodes. And it makes me happy that actually there is a possibility of this happening, or it's already happening, which leads me to my next follow-up is that how far are we with Ocean V4 in actually solving this? I mean, are there any successful use cases already with people using the Ocean Marketplace and going with this?
Yeah, so the timeline for Ocean is, the project started really in earnest in mid-2017. And Ocean V1 and V2, we laid out, you can view Ocean V1 to V4 as each one a succession of solving sort of one big problem at a time. So Ocean V1 basically said, let's have sovereign data. And Ocean V2 says, so Ocean V1 is, how do you solve the issue of people owning their own data rather than some centralized bank or something holding the data? So that's Ocean V1. V2, people said, okay, well, if I'm going to download my data, if I'm going to publish data, what if other people can download it? Can't they copy and paste it? Won't that kill privacy? So Ocean V2 said, that's true. And so let's leverage some privacy preserving technology. We did a survey, we looked around at all the different approaches, everything from differential privacy to homework encryption, and they're all at different levels of maturity. But by far the simplest is simply let compute sit next to the data itself, and then people buy access to results. So instead of me selling, imagine I'm selling my DNA data. Well, if someone downloads that, then they've got that, and maybe they can, that can be problematic, right? Because that's pretty sensitive data. But instead, what if they just say, okay, I want to compute some average across my DNA data, or compare Trent's DNA data with 5 other DNA data, and just look at like 1 or 2 fields of that DNA data, right? That is basically much simpler. So that's what Ocean V2 was computed data. So Ocean V2 came out in early 2020. Ocean V1 came out the year before. And so Ocean V1 solved data sovereignty. Ocean V2 solved privacy. Ocean v3 basically said, it actually solved a few things at once. How do we make the thing simpler? How do we have really crazy interoperability for custody and management of data, as well as how do we price data? And so it solved those things: interoperability, simplicity, and automatic pricing. And then when we shipped Ocean v3, that was last fall, so like about October. We had there was people kind of really got excited, and a lot of people piled in and published hundreds of data sets, millions of dollars of value locked up, et cetera, and really promising. And there a couple things then slowed the traction there. One was the gas fees on Ethereum mainnet went kind of crazy, sort of with the basically that was at the beginning of this year. And the second thing was there was a small fraction of users that took advantage of some special dynamics of these automated exchanges, where they could rug pull. So they would publish a data set, pump it up, get other people to start buying in, and then they would dump on them. So that's called a rug pull in crypto speak. And so it was basically not quite as safe as it could be. So what we're doing for Ocean v4 is solving rug pulls. And also we're doing the data NFTs, and I can get to that. And also, I guess one more thing, which is help people monetize even further. So basically Ocean v3 added a few things. It added, like I mentioned, better management of data with sovereign data with the wallets, automatic pricing of data, and simplicity. Ocean v4 adds 3 specific things: solve rug pulls, data NFTs, and help community monetize. And the timing is we're targeting mid-January next year. We were hoping to have it this year, but we prefer quality over rushing things by a month or two.
Okay, and if you have to pick your favorite use case out of it, which one would you pick up?
Yeah, so I mean, Ocean v4, each of these sort of big bullet points addresses particular issues that we encountered, right? So for us, it's sort of ship early, ship often, keep learning, right? And between the big releases, we always have steady, small point releases and stuff, right? Like sub points. So the rug pulls was an issue we encountered from v3, and we solved that. The problem to solve is solve rug pulls, and the feature that we're solving it with is making it basically impossible to become a data token whale. So when you publish a data set, you no longer own 100% of those tokens up front. Rather, they are controlled by the exchange, the decentralized exchange. And then whenever people stake into that decentralized exchange, into that pool, then it's minting more tokens. So basically you are incentivized to get people, like how do you make money as a publisher? It's whenever people buy and consume those data assets, then you're going to get those data assets back, like each of those tokens. So that basically, it flips it around, right? It means there's no longer sort of data token whales, and instead it is incentivizing people, the publishers, to really get consumption happening. And so that is, pretty big on its own. And by doing that, it allows us to also ship something on the heels of v4 called data farming. And to summarize, it's sort of an incentive program, running on this blockchain incentives thing. I'll get into that later. To your question then, though, like what are the other use cases? So there's solve rug pulls, data NFTs, and help community monetize. So data NFTs are basically a refinement of what we had in Ocean v3 to serve particular more use cases. So in Ocean v3, what we learned from Ascribes and so on is, what does it mean to own something, right? And the word ownership is really a red herring. It's sort of like the word consciousness, right? What does it mean to be conscious? Or AI, what does AI mean and stuff, right? And I've always found that it's really useful if you can discover some pragmatic definition. Usually someone else has come up with that pragmatic definition. And also acknowledging that there's always going to be many, many definitions for any of these things. There's 20 different definitions for AI. There's 20 definitions for consciousness, et cetera. And there's 20 definitions for NFTs. That's okay, right? So what is or ownership, actually, I should say too. So what is a pragmatic definition for ownership? And over the one that I've discovered is a pragmatic definition for ownership is a bundle of rights. To own something is to have a particular bundle of rights. Let me elaborate. So let's talk about music, right? Michael Jackson, he I guess I'm on a Michael Jackson kick today. So he, wrote the songs around the Thriller album, and then he recorded them. And once he recorded them, he sold those master recordings and some associated rights around that to a big music label, I forget which, and let's say Universal for fun, and then Universal then license those. They manufactured CDs, etc., and then people could go and buy a CD and listen to them. Actually, back then it wasn't even CDs; it was tapes and LPs, and then radio stations too. So if I bought a tape from Michael Jackson Thriller in the year 1987, do I own Thriller, or does Universal own Thriller, right? And so the word ownership it's kind of meaningless, because, well, Universal owns Thriller if you define it a certain way, or I own Thriller if you define it a certain way, et cetera, or the radio station owns Thriller. What is more productive is to say, what rights does each party have, right? So Universal has the right to publish tapes and sell those. Universal has the right to publish LPs. Universal has the right to give licenses to radio stations to play Michael Jackson songs in Thriller album, right? So those are some of the rights that Universal has, and for that set of rights, it paid a large fee, millions of dollars, for the Michael Jackson master tapes, etc. And it probably wasn't Universal. I remember Michael Jackson had his own company for a while called Apple Recordings, nothing to do with Apple the company, and then they were sold and stuff. So, but I'm just using that as an example, of course.
Okay.
So, and then myself, if I buy a tape from Michael Jackson Thriller, I have the right to listen to that myself, right? I might, and depending on what tape I buy, I might not even have the right to resell that tape, although there is small secondary markets for tapes, right? So it's a similar thing with data, right? And with digital art, right? So with Ascribe, when we did digital art, it's like, okay, when you're publishing that initial work, you are claiming that you have all the rights around it, either copyright, which is the main thing you get as a creator, which means all other rights derived from that baseline copyright. So you either have copyright or some sort of exclusive license against that copyrighted work that no one else can do anything. So you have all the rights to sublicense. And so when you're publishing a digital work in Ascribe, you claim that. And then and then in Ascribe, there was different editions. Each basically is a sublicense to be able to buy and sell that sublicense to others. So edition 1, edition 2, et cetera. And I could sell to a museum, and the museum A could sell to museum B, et cetera. And they have the right to publicly display. They have the right to resell, basically. And it's a similar thing for data. So when I publish my CSV file holding my DNA, then I am claiming that I have copyright on that. And I do, being a human being, I have copyright on my DNA, unless some nefarious person has somehow asserted that against me. And there are games like that, by the way. And I'm looking at you, 23andMe. Anyway,
that was funny.
And yeah, no, actually, as a quick aside, this kind of points to the problem of data. So 23andMe, I signed up for them many years ago. I got them to do a DNA test of my data, and they promised they would never, ever, ever sell my data, right? I'm like, great, I'll learn some stuff about me. And then a few years ago, they sent an email to everyone, hey, we're changing our terms and conditions. Can you please check here, right? And they didn't say what they're changing, but basically what they changed, if you looked at the news reports at the time or you read the new updates, they basically said, we're going to have the right to sell your data from now on. And you have like 3 weeks to comply, basically, right? And so I'm like, no way. So I basically
that's scary.
Yeah, and basically they discovered that they couldn't basically get any other business models at the time. So they're like, let's sell this data that we don't really own, but we're going to basically try to sneak it through. And they did, right? So 23andMe is now selling your data, right? And to me, it's like that is yet another reason we're doing Ocean, right? As an example. And what's crazy, GDPR was already there. And so I filed a report saying, I would like to be able to download my data, please. And then I want to shut down my account. It took them several weeks, I think like 4 or 5 weeks, to line it up for me to be able to download the data. And by the time I had my data downloaded, it had already crossed the threshold into them being able to sell my data, which is like super uncool too. So I couldn't even download data that I own myself.
Oh God.
Yeah. So my data is probably now held by a bunch of big pharma companies, et cetera, throughout the world, even though it was, really, there's obviously a very ambiguous gray area there about what is right and not, like, and what is legal and not. So anyway, that's an example. So going back to my example here, with uh, ownership, right? So I publish the DNA data that I own, or I should have all the rights to, and so I'm claiming that I have the rights to that, and then I publish one of these data tokens that says, like, when I'm publishing it, it creates a data token, this fungible thing. And then everyone's getting licenses to that whenever I send them, the licenses, or it can be computed data, right? So that's basically the basic idea. Now, what Ocean v4 does is saying, when you publish just this claim initially, that is a single NFT. It's a non-fungible token because you can't make copyright fungible. There's only one entity that has control of it.
Awesome.
And so we're gonna explicitly have it where it's represented as a token, rather than sort of implicitly with whoever published the contract. And that's what Ocean v4 does. But what that also does, and then you can still have the sublicenses against that, right? The fungible tokens. And so basically Ocean v4 pulls this apart. It's explicitly representing who has copyright and making that separate from who has licenses. And then by explicitly representing who has copyright or the IP, what you can do is, before you even publish any licenses or anything, you can basically start accruing more and more value to that, right? So you can, be doing research on, drug design or otherwise, making a better data set. You've already claimed that initial thing, but you keep improving and improving it. And then you some fungible some license against it, and that's a first set of ERC20 licenses. And then you can even make a second and a third. Maybe one license is to use for a day, another license is to use for a month, another one's for a year, right? And maybe another one is for computed data against it, right? And all of those can be against that same single base piece of IP, right? So there's a bunch of use cases there. Another big use case is, and this is a big reason we did it now versus a year or two ago. In 2021, it's pretty clear NFTs took off, right? Mostly NFTs for digital art, which makes me very happy. Like, artists are getting paid, hooray! But also, what benefit we realized, okay, because this is blowing up, then the tooling around NFTs is exploding too. So there's way more wallets that have really good support for these NFTs, these non-fungible tokens. There's way more exchanges that have, buying and selling. The OpenSeas of the world, even Binance and others have exchanges for it now. So we're like, great, cool. So if we actually explicitly represent copyright as this NFT, then now there's really great wallet support for this too. So data NFTs have now, thanks to the explosion of NFTs, they have great support in wallets, exchanges, et cetera. So that's the summary of that, and many, many benefits, of course. The final one is help community monetize. It's just that, right? In V3, if you're running a market, you could only get 0.1% cut of the consume volume of the sales. In V4, you can set whatever percentage you want, and not just for consume, but also for swap and for publish. So it basically makes it easier for more people to create their own marketplaces. And there's about 10 teams or so making their own marketplaces. Instead of using Ocean Market, you can create your own, right?
I can't believe so much has happened since V3 last time when we interviewed Bruce. And so I see a lot of things are happening for Ocean. And, it's great to see that one day all these use cases will have mass adoption, at least the idea of it. So within all this, there's also a lot of noise around Ocean DAO. And, particularly we have spoken about DAOs also in the past in one episode with Alex. I think it was third, fourth. So tell us the entire process of setting up Ocean DAO, where you are right now. What are your expectations out of it? And how's the whole experience going with that?
Yeah, happy to share. So at a 10,000 foot view, Ocean DAO is a critical piece of Ocean decentralizing, and it is the foundation of sort of a fully decentralized Ocean ecosystem. So let's unpack that. Over time, right, we keep iterating with our users and with our community and learning about what makes sense and what doesn't make sense and so on. And as we were going down the path of designing V3, we saw that we also had an opportunity not just to simplify how we did data sharing and all that, but to improve the macro level token design of Ocean itself towards long-term sustainability, et cetera, based on observing learnings of many token projects over the previous couple of years. And we were like, okay, well, what pattern makes sense as sort of this macro level design for long-term sustainability? And if you think about it, a DAO is sort of like a huge co-op. That's one way to think about it, right? And most DAOs you see now, they're kind of like Dunbar DAOs. They're maybe scaled to 150 people, but you can have co-ops that scale to 10,000 or 100,000 people. And going back to Saskatchewan growing up, Saskatchewan Wheat Pool had tens of thousands of farmers, right? It had scaled. It had imposed a little bit of hierarchy. It had 300 elected delegates who would meet, probably 30 times a year to meet and plan things. And then there was an executive that was elected from the delegates, et cetera, right? And then, all the members, all the different farmers could vote, et cetera. So, and this was a co-op. This wasn't a company per se. It was a co-op. So each member owned a share, like a piece of this co-op, but it was basically serving its members, right? So we can think of DAOs like that too, and communities around DAOs and so on, right? And so you can even view right now, Ocean itself, you can view as some co-op, but it's very loosely structured because it's just the Ocean token holders, and the Ocean DAO itself has a piece of this. But then you can ask, okay, how can you leverage the learnings of co-ops to that have scaled, and the learnings of other sort of organizations in the last few years towards Ocean. So there's another learning too, and that is co-ops. If you're a co-op, you're allowed to make money, and commons too, right? Like a common, there's sometimes a misconception. The idea of a commons isn't necessarily something that is fully public. It's actually serving a community, right? Like this is Elinor Ostrom, who won Nobel Prize around researching commons and so on. So it might be serving a group of fishermen off the coast of Tahiti, or it might be serving a group of tens of thousands of farmers, helping them to market and distribute grain, right? So the Saskatchewan Wheat Pool is a co-op, a commons to serve farmers, and it's accessible to them, et cetera. So, but it's okay for commons or co-ops to make money. Looking around, what other businesses make tons of money and are sustainable, and which ones are growing? And I've been a long time admirer of Amazon in their ability to grow and discover new markets. And obviously, it has its negative flaws, but as a design, like Jeff Bezos is an amazing token designer, basically, or dynamical system designer, right? And basically, Amazon has this flywheel at the heart of it, which is towards growth. And how it works is if they have more selection of products in the market, then more people will come to the market, which means more revenue coming from the market. And more revenue means more sellers will sell in the market, which means better selection, which means more people coming. And the loop goes round and round and round, right? This is assuming you have good discovery. But basically, it's this engine of growth, right? So once again, right, if you have lots of items in the market, you can't help but sell more. If you can't help but sell more, you can't help but have more people selling on your market. And if you have more people selling in your market, you can't help but have more variety. And if you have more variety and good discovery tools, you can't help but sell more. And it loops around and around. And this concept was, Jeff Bezos, as he was designing Amazon, he took the idea from Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great and so on, and loved the concept so much that he put Jim Collins on his board. And Jim has been on that board for like 2 decades now. And that's basically how Amazon grew and grew and grew over the years. And it's also the model for it to sort of expand into other businesses, because Amazon is willing to learn with this underlying dynamical model, right? And so the dynamical model for Ocean is similar, actually, but targeted towards this massive commons around this mission of unlocking an open data economy while preserving privacy. So subject to that mission, right? So what does this mean? We want there to be tons and tons of data available in the Ocean ecosystem, on Ocean Market and the 1,000 other markets, right? And if you have more of this data available, from marketplace perspective, you can't help but have more people supplying and it growing, et cetera. But then also in terms of the growth engine, the more sales you have on it, if you take a cut of those sales and you feed those towards the community for growth, like where the community itself finds ways to grow, then it loops around, right? And this is exactly what Amazon is doing. Amazon takes a cut of its sales and it takes that cut and puts it into R&D, et cetera, to grow faster, right? And so, this is sort of part of the playbook from Amazon that we're using for Ocean, and that's the macro system level design. So it's taking this idea of, the Amazon flywheel and turning it into something we call the Web3 sustainability loop. And then we've applied that to Ocean. And if you think about that, then, so as there's more and more, sales happening on Ocean Market and other markets, then there's more and more money flowing to the community. How do you allocate that money flowing to the community to actually projects that help to grow, right? In a scalable fashion? That is the big question. Amazon does it, with Jeff Bezos and his lieutenants, and they have basically a resource allocation algorithm that they designed, right? So what would the resource allocation algorithm look like for Ocean? And the answer is Ocean DAO and other related items. So Ocean DAO basically says, okay, there's a bunch of people can propose different ways of how Ocean can grow. And then the community can say, okay, well, I'm going to vote on these on which ones I think will do the best. And so the proposals that have the most votes, then they get selected and they get funding. And the other projects, people can pursue them, but they just won't get funding, right? And so in that way, and incentives are aligned because you're voting as a function of how much Ocean you hold. So you don't want your Ocean to be spent on projects that don't help to fundamentally help the health of Ocean. And so basically it's aligned that way. And so that's what Ocean DAO is about. And then, so it started off just as, a very, very streamlined grants DAO, just around driving in, trying to ensure that the ROI is greater than one, such that you have this snowball effect. It just grows. Sort of an update. And by the way, with that, it's been running for about a year. It started off the first month. It had $25,000 US worth of grants. These days, it has about $500,000 worth of grants. So it's grown a lot. There's about 100 teams that have got grants. There's been basically a whole ecosystem that has flourished around it and a whole community. So, and that to me is like a big part of the beating heart of the Ocean ecosystem now, propelled by the DAO. Now we've discovered that, okay, the DAO as is has been pretty good. How can we make it even more accessible, a little less harsh, a little more around, growing community, et cetera? So instead of just saying ROI greater than one, focusing on that, we're saying, okay, for any given project, how much, does it help to grow Ocean? How viable is the project? But also, how much is the team doing to help grow community? And how much does the project itself help to grow community? And so we're using these factors as sort of an update to the criteria to make Ocean DAO a little softer and gentler. And then in combination with that, we have just introduced the idea of working groups. So we've started with 5 working groups, and basically it's little modules, little pieces of people working on aspects of Ocean DAO that will extend. So there's a group working on the roadmap for Ocean DAO. There's a group working on what sort of projects do we want to earmark to sort of incentivize for? Do we want to have an incentive to have a first-class integration with Arweave, for example? And there's other projects around driving data consumed volume and so on. So basically, there's this new concept of working groups, and it sort of runs complementary to the grants. And over time, these working groups will grow from like 5 working groups to 10, then 15, and so on. So that's Ocean DAO, basically. And by the way, as the working groups grow, in number and in size for each working group, that is how Ocean itself gets more and more decentralized, right? Because it means these teams can get grants, but also people that are in the teams, as well as others in the community, can participate in these working groups to basically help to grow Ocean ecosystem in various ways that they, that suits their skills and passion.
Yeah. So I'm just, as you're speaking, I'm just soaking in all the knowledge and I'm thinking, okay, it looks like a lot of different projects when you look from the outside, but actually it's also beautifully linked that it would just not exist without the other, as we, spoke about all these initiatives. And Ocean DAO, I mean, it's a win-win for everybody, seems like. So you said it's been over a year and you've also raised like the funding. So how big is the community per se, you could say, or how has it been growing? Is there a number you could share with us?
Yeah, so 2 things on the question of raising the funding, right? Going back to blockchain benefits, right? Decentralized immutable assets and incentives. So when we were designing the Ocean token, back in the day before the token launch, we said, let's hold back the majority of tokens for the community to drive growth. And so we've always had 51% held back just for that. Plus within Ocean Protocol Foundation, we've had on the order of 15, 20% also sitting in there. So it's on the order of 65, 70% of the Ocean token supply is basically earmarked for deployment to the community. And we have been deploying as aggressively as possible and scaling up as we can go. So OceanDAO gets a chunk of that, basically about a quarter of that. So we announced the number for that, which is more than $100 million worth of funding to teams over the next number of years, right? And so that's pretty generous on its own. And then data farming, which is, I'll just elaborate here, it's liquidity mining. It's basically an incentive program to help encourage people to publish data sets that get consumed and to encourage people to stake in data sets towards getting consumed. It's all basically towards driving consume volume, which is where the rubber hits the road for value creation in Ocean. A data set gets published, then someone else buys it, and then that buyer consumes it. When they're consuming it, they're using it to create value. Maybe it's to make predictions, predicting the stock market, or maybe it's to make predictions for predicting cancer or otherwise, right? But that's where the value capture happens, is when the data set is being consumed. And that's sort of a key performance indicator for Ocean overall, a metric to optimize for. So I'll answer your question, don't worry. So that's basically in terms of money allocated, right? The majority of Ocean tokens are allocated to growth over time, and OceanDAO and data farming, et cetera, are the key vehicles by which we do that. They're complementary as well. The DAO, there's much more subjective human judgment on, who's getting what based on their track record, et cetera. Whereas the data farming is very objective. It's measurable, right? Just the same way that Bitcoin is very, very objective. It's like you're either contributing to security or not. Bitcoin knows. And then to your question then on specific numbers for the OceanDAO community and so on. Let's see here. So there's about 100 teams that have got funding in OceanDAO. As of October 6th, there was 80 plus. So that's why I'm guessing 100 plus now, because there's one more round. There's about 10 teams that are building third-party data markets. Some of these, larger projects, publicly traded companies like WiseKey. Some of them, more small startups and stuff, right? There's several teams that have some product contracts with Ocean to build very specific functionality, such as Raven protocol for decentralized federated learning and more. And then within OceanDAO itself, on those numbers, I'm just going to pull up some numbers from a month ago, because I don't know if I have more recent ones. So just give me a second here.
Sure.
So this is numbers from October 6th or so. At the time, there was 947 different wallets that had voted, 178 proposals submitted, 120 million Ocean tokens that had been voted, and 40 community town halls held. So those are some numbers. In terms of the people in the ecosystem, the town halls typically have 15 to 35 or 50 even people show up any given week. They are every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Berlin time. And if you go into the Ocean Discord, there's, I don't even know how many, but there's many active channels now. The Telegram is even more. The Twitter, you can look at the Twitter follower count, all that. It's more than 100,000, for example, there, right? So there's, social media metrics, but even more interesting than social media metrics is really, what is the number of teams building the ecosystem? So we're on the order of 100 teams that have got grants. Of those, what fraction is active? There's, probably at least 20 or 30 that are really, truly active in a really great way, building really great projects. Maybe it's higher, but I'm trying to be a bit conservative here. So yeah, that's kind of where Ocean's at, right?
Yeah.
And compared to a year ago, maybe there was 3 or 5 teams. So, it's really grown in the last year. And the big driver of that has been, the vehicle of OceanDAO, right?
Really grown. Okay. So I think we just have like 6 minutes, but I have one follow-up on OceanDAO. So how is it really decided that which projects get funded, or what is your voting system that goes around the OceanDAO?
Yeah. So anyone can submit a proposal, and then depending, if you haven't submitted a proposal before, there's a funding limit. But if you've submitted proposals and successfully completed past project, the funding can be as high as 35,000 dollars any given month, dollars worth of Ocean. And so, we have several teams that are at that level where they're making proposals on the order of 35,000 US dollars, and they can come back monthly if they want, right? And so anyone can submit. And then how it's decided is voting, and it's a monthly cadence, right? So right now, people are submitting projects for the next round, which is R12, and the voting for that will be in early December. And the voting is with Ocean Token. So we have started out with one token, one vote. And initially it was one token, one vote, and every different project you would vote differently. We've recently tweaked it where now it is you can only spend that one token to vote on any one of the projects that have applied. So if there's 20 projects that have applied, then you can only allocate that token vote in one of those places. So if I've got 100 tokens to vote, maybe I'll vote 20 yes votes to project 1, 20 no votes to project 2, and 60 yes votes to project 3. And that helps people to focus on which projects they care the most about. Now, what we also see is that in governance, there's this long-standing question. There's this democratic ideal, which is one human, one vote, and that's really nice. But it doesn't account for any skin in the game, right? What if someone has just one token and just joined in the Ocean community yesterday? Should they have the same vote as someone who's really passionate about Ocean and owns 1 million tokens, right? So that's but there's the democratic ideal. The flip side is there's sort of the shareholder ideal or the skin in the game ideal, which is one token, one vote, right? And one token, one vote, it has the benefit of, skin in the game, all that. But neither is perfect. Ideally, you have some sort of way to reconcile that, right? To reconcile these two things. And one way to reconcile is say, okay, let's allow you to weight your vote based on how many tokens you have, but not linearly. So you can scale it with a square root or with a log or something. And if you scale with a square root, that's called quadratic voting. And it's a popular idea, and we are moving towards that. The reason we haven't implemented it yet is Sybil attacks. Basically, if I, let's say that Ocean introduced quadratic voting in last round. Well, if I want to, and let's say I've got, I don't know, for fun, 100,000 tokens. If I want to have a really big impact, I would just split my 100,000 tokens into, say, 100 different wallets, and then vote with each wallet separately. And that would have way more impact than if I'm voting from a single wallet, right? So that's called the Sybil attack. It's sort of like cloning myself 100 times, attack of the clones, if you will. And so that's the thing to solve. And there has been really great progress in addressing Sybil attacks from the DAO community over the last 6 months, 12 months. And so we're going to be leveraging that progress for Ocean. So in the meantime, it's one token, one vote, but with directing tokens. Soon it will, reconcile more, this nice trade-off between the democratic ideal and the skin in the game ideal with quadratic voting. And that'll be in the next month or two.
Okay. And when does this, when's the last round of Ocean DAO? I mean, does that make sense, the question?
It happens every month.
Okay.
And so every month there's, these days it's 500,000 Ocean is available. Each Ocean is worth about $1, so it's about $500,000 worth of Ocean any given month. And
Oh, wow.
that increased, like I said, from initially it was $25,000, but we grew it, right? Because we want to deploy capital to teams that want to grow Ocean, who have this mission and value. So you can't just apply saying I want money. It has to be I'd like to have money, please. I subscribe to the mission and vision of Ocean. About unlocking this open data economy. And here's how we think we can add value. And maybe you're a team that wants to do outreach in India. Great, then you can apply and get funding. And we have teams like that. We have ones for India and Japan and otherwise for that. We have other, we have some people have said, hey, I want to build a really great mobile first data wallet. Great, we have people doing that. We have teams that are adding to the core with documentation or otherwise. We have teams that are building other integrations and more. So there's a wide variety of different things people can do, whether it's technical or outreach or otherwise. We're it's up to 500,000, and it's going to keep growing as time goes on, right?
Okay, so I'm sure a lot of people are going to apply after listening to this podcast as well. And I think time is running out, Trent, but on wrapping up, so 2021 was the year of scaling for Ocean, and you mentioned in one of your blogs that we will also share in the show notes of this podcast is that you mentioned that the coming years are also going to be the years of scaling. So if you have to really mention or list, the 3 things that you plan to achieve in 2022, or rather plan to focus on, what would you list as a concluding remark?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, like basically we view 2020 as the 0 to 1 year, right? The year where we had initial product market fit track some early traction around that, right? And then 2021, 2022, et cetera, is all the 1 to n. So 2020, 0 to 1, and then after that, it's 1 to n. And that means when you say 1 to n traction, it means more people, more transactions on Ocean, more data consumed volume, et cetera. And data consumed volume is probably the best metric overall, right? And to grow because it shows that there's real value being created, et cetera. But of course, we want to encourage free sharing of data, et cetera, all that too. Then to your question, specifically of what is it for 2022 that I see will have the big impact. I see, in the early part of 2022, we're going to be launching V4 and data farming. And V4 is the sell rug pulls, data NFTs, and help community monetize. So once we release that and the data farming, it's going to be a lot of work and a very busy time and very exciting time for the community, because we see that this unlocks a lot of stuff, a lot of value. Data farming itself is going to be very generous. So we expect that that's going to quite energize the community a lot, and that's going to keep our team quite busy throughout a lot of the year. Besides that, I also see that OceanDAO itself is going to keep getting bigger and scaling a lot more. And that's very exciting, because that's where, the community really, the community is all really coming into fold. And, the importance of the core team is already much lower than it was a year ago, right? Because we've got this amazing community that has formed around Ocean. So OceanDAO is basically going to keep growing and evolving with these working groups and so on. And then beyond that, I see kind of related to OceanDAO, it's simply like the use cases and applications, right? We're starting to see, more applications from the top-down perspective with consortia like GaiaX, from the bottom-up perspective with, third-party marketplaces and other just really, really cool applications, whether it's for data unions and otherwise. And I see a lot more of that for 2021 as well. So to summarize, the three big pillars in a sense are V4 data farming, OceanDAO scaling, and just a lot more real world use cases and applications via top down and bottom up.
Yeah. And since you're growing so fast, now the next time we need to have you before 1 year and not at a 1 year gap.
Sure.
So, and thank you, Trent. This was so much fun and so much for me, also like an educational class. So I really enjoyed it. And thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.